Welcome everybody to the Resilient Minds podcast. I'm extremely grateful, excited to welcome a man that I've had the pleasure of listening to as he spent time with one of my teachers and our teacher. But Ben Lamm, thank you for being here, brother. It's amazing to have you here, bro.
Yeah, thanks so much for having me.
Dude, it's like I was saying just before we kind of hit play. Watching the congruence in the way that you're being, in the way that you show up, in the way that your nature is, and what you've devoted your time and energy to really spend while we're here. It's inspiring. And I think it's really important for people to know that we can follow this beingness in ourselves and we can choose to operate from this behavior and really create from that place. So I just really thank you for your time and your presence.
Yeah, no, thanks for having me. What we're doing's hard and weird and interesting, but we have some major challenges ahead of us from a biodiversity perspective, and hopefully we're just one of 1,000 companies working on challenges like this that are interesting and important.
For those that don't know you, I'm just going to go a little bit into a little bit of your background because I think it's super important. For those that don't know Ben Lamm is the co-founder and CEO of Colossal. He's been serial technology entrepreneur driven to solve the most complex challenges facing our planet, which I think more of us can really learn from. For over a decade, Ben's built disruptive businesses that future-proof our world and really are focused on leaving this world behind better than when we found it, which is really exciting because I think that that's something that we can all really step into. In addition to leading and growing his own companies, he's really passionate about emerging technologies, science, space, and climate change, which allows us to leave this world behind better than when we found it as well, focusing on the next generations. He's super active in angel investing, incubators, startup communities, and Ben really invests in software and emerging tech that's deeply engaged in the technology defense and again, climate change communities. So thanks for devoting, man. This it's inspiring to watch. It's nice to see. I know that we're challenged with this old persona of what business may look like, and for me, it's been a meaningful mission to just highlight the good that's out there because there is lots of good as well.
Yeah, same. I think that, I feel like now more than ever is the time for kind of like that moonshot thinking, right? Like so many of us were confined during COVID. We've seen ups and downs in markets and political environments and in kind of the global geopolitics of the world. But I think that coming out of COVID, I think that, I've seen more and more people do a lot of introspection and say, is this what we should be doing? Is this where I should be spending my time? What do I really want out of life? And I think that, it's inspired more and more people to do bigger and more interesting things, right? Because, the same old, and the same iteration of the next software or the next product, while it's interesting, it doesn't really kind of move the dial for humanity. So I do think that, a lot of, the silver lining that came out of COVID and some of the lockdowns and others is hopefully more and more people are thinking about working on these harder projects. And look, they're not all going to be successful, but all in all, it is pretty exciting to see kind of the kind of like pre-Cambrian explosion of startups working on really hard, challenging problems.
And I'm noticing too is like these challenges we can really build upon uh, the existing structures that have been built before us. So it's like Tony always says we can stand on each other's shoulders. We learn from the people that have built the roads or built the planes or done all these things, and so we can learn from our predecessors. They've left some mistakes, created really a lot of opportunities, and so by recognizing these patterns, we can utilize them and then create new ones. And so, this is again Tony's words, not mine, but I'm just emphasizing it, being a good student. But fundamentally, allowing to stand on these shoulders is really what I'm seeing that allows us to encourage our next generation. So I guess for me, I always get curious about the biggest thing of is like we've experienced, we focus on our why, but why has this been meaningful to you? Like what were the experiences that for you, Ben, were so meaningful that you were curious enough to say, we could figure out something better. We could do something more uh bigger. Peter Diamandis, he's always talks about, the biggest world's biggest problems are the biggest business opportunities. And so it's interesting how so many of us choose not to go and think that big, but then there's a few of us that do that and actually make it happen. So I'm curious what your experience has been to really choose that path.
Yeah, I would say that, like, first and foremost, when you really follow kind of like what your passion is and what like the universe has in store for you, things just start opening up. I was actually having a conversation last night with someone about this and said, "Oh yeah, I started down this path. I thought it would be very difficult, and it's not easy." But we've had so many people that have said, "Oh, let me introduce you to this person. Let me open up this door. Let me help you with this." And so I've seen this trickle down effect when you're really in the zone and in the area that you're supposed to be in. Those doors just not automatically open, but they may be cracked open versus you having to like break down a brick wall, right? And so I've seen that firsthand with this, and for me, kind of how I got into this is, I had built a handful of software companies. I thought they were all interesting. I thought, or I wouldn't have built them in the first place, but none of them like truly changed the world. And I had said in a bunch of pitch meetings, like, oh, I'm doing this because I want to change the world. I'm doing this because it wants to be a big impact. And most of those companies just got acquired and got people had a good return and they provided good jobs and they were incrementally better than the thing that came before it, right? But then I met this guy, George Church, that if you don't know George, he's arguably the father of synthetic biology, and he completely blew my mind, right? And so he showed me that we had the tools and technologies in order to one, save critically endangered species, two, bring back lost extinct species, and then develop technologies through both of those that could help human healthcare. And what was crazy to me was I felt like I had said, 1,000 times, I'm building this company to change the world. I'm doing this to change the world. But I felt like this was the first moment that it's like, if you don't do this, then you can never say those words again. Because George has given you an opportunity to truly make an impact, to truly change the world. And if you don't take that risk when it's presented to you, then you can't truly be in a position where you can say you want to do this if given the opportunity and you pass it up. And so George really inspired me. And when you think about, the climate and you think about the environment and you think about how we're changing the world as we as humans try to figure out how to coexist within it, that sounds like a big daunting problem. But one thing that, while it's may still sound daunting, one thing that's just a subset of that is biodiversity. And, to me, it's not a political issue. Sometimes you have the right or the left having different perspectives on some of these different world issues and how to solve them and still maintain our way of life. But one of the things that's really interesting about loss of biodiversity and de-extinction is it's not a political issue at all, right? It's something that both sides of the aisle that we talk to agree that losing species and losing biodiversity is bad. Preserving what's here and making more of them is good, right? And anytime we can undo the sins of the past of species we've eradicated, that's good. And so we found this thing that's really interesting and innovative that seems to be able to innovate around conservation, which needs a ton of innovation, right? There should be 1,000 companies like Colossal innovating around conservation. And then we found this lane that both sides of the political spectrum generally agree on, maybe for different reasons, but still generally agree on. And then you have this like massive halo effect of that if we are successful, we will inspire hopefully the next generation to go be scientists and solve even bigger challenges using synthetic biology. And so when we took a step back and looked at the opportunity, we thought there isn't something that we found that we could be as impactful for, that we had the skills for. And I'm not a background in biology in any way, but I know how to build teams of people that are much smarter than me to go work on these problems. And so that was kind of my value that I thought I could bring, to the table.
Thank you for saying this, bro. It means so much to me. Like, it's like,
It's very nice.
yeah, because, like, I don't think we need to do anything alone. And uh, it's about teamwork. Teamwork really makes the dream work.
Oh, you're
I
right.
really believe.
I always say this: entrepreneurship is a team sport. It's 100%. Sometimes, incorrectly, one CEO or one entrepreneur gets a lot of the credit, but there's a lot of people that went into that, right? I always, a lot of times people are like, "Oh, you're doing this." I'm like, "No, we have 170 scientists that are doing this. I'm just helping them." And we've got, and this is, people are like, "Oh, this is a cool vision that you had." And I'm like, "No, this is yours vision. I'm just enabling it, right?" And so, entrepreneurship is a team sport. And to be successful, it's much better to do that. It's much easier, to push a rock uphill or a massive mammoth-sized boulder uphill if you've got lots of people beside you and next to you and behind you helping you push it.
And that's community, that's like family, that's development, that's growth. Like,
Yeah.
I remember when I was young and I would watch Tony from afar and just inspired by him, really thinking that, hey, this man, has done it all himself, but he's really done so much deep work of like building the teams, going into all these atmospheres, spending time with people, creating change. And it's easy to observe kind of from a distance or have this perspective. And then when you really go and you do the work and you discover that, everybody is your teacher, everybody has something to give, everybody has something to add, everyone has so much value and wisdom to contribute, that really, we're just big students. Like, we're just huge
Exactly.
students, you know? And this innocence and playfulness actually starts to become more critical as entrepreneurs that are focusing, on taking care of our playground, taking care of our community, looking after each other, figuring out, hey, I don't know this, but hey, maybe Ben does, or maybe Ben knows, like, and doing this in a collective manner, it starts to uh it's like, there's this beautiful saying, and I'm certain that you've heard it, is the people at the top are collaborating, competition doesn't really exist. And
Yeah.
uh, that's what I really loved, watching you and Tony on stage talking about, problems, figuring out solutions, opening up a level of consciousness that helping, like, hey man, like, we're in this together, we're on the same
Yeah,
planet,
I always say this, people always say this about Colossal, right? Because we have lots of people that are fans of what we're doing. We have lots of people that aren't. And, we always say, look, we're not gonna do everything right. And we have a mentality at Colossal to run towards critics versus away from critics, right? Because we really want to understand like how we can do things better. And so I think that openness in dialogue and openness in like collaboration and kind of that approach to criticism has really helped our business in terms of like how we're thinking about things, right? And look, you're always going to have the uninformed critics, right? That don't have that are like the armchair X tweet, people that are writing on X and posting and just saying, that they hate something for whatever reason. You're always going to have those people, but you can't satisfy those people. But when you have really thoughtful, really smart, informed critics, not listening to it, by not listening to them, you're doing yourself a disservice. And so we've taken a mentality at Colossal to run towards those critics, to get feedback from those critics, and try to incorporate a lot of what they think about and what they suggest into our business. And some of our biggest critics are now our biggest advisors at the company. And I think that kind of goes to that, spirit of, collaboration and not and having thick skin, but also being okay with the fact that you may not know everything. And it's okay to ask people. Like I said, I have zero background in biology and I'm running, arguably, I personally think one of the most interesting synthetic biology companies in the planet, and I have no background in biology. And so, I think I try to ask the right questions and listen to people that are much smarter than me when they say stuff.
This is like the role of a CEO, is listening. At least this is what I'm hearing from what you're sharing is you're learning to facilitate a group of people, and you're doing it. You're learning by doing, by the way. And so it really encourages. This is like the conscious way of creating entrepreneurs and a meaningful cause that doesn't have anything to do with you, but it gets to come through you because you're facilitating it. So you're really facilitating change by encouraging other people to shine through an organism, or in this case, an organization, that is bringing change to the planet. So I love that you're just so open about it, because it gives, especially in my journey, so much more uh, color and so much more uh, just feeling to knowing that, hey, I'm constantly doing my best. So what are some of the challenges that you have faced as you grew, um, and maybe this, um, going through different people's maps of awareness or levels of consciousness, and appreciating and understanding their worldview, and then also still choosing to take action based off of what felt best for you? How did you kind of approach situations like that, and what would you suggest for somebody like myself that is constantly in this place of challenge,
Yeah,
breaking
I think
through?
that, yeah,
Yeah.
I think it's one of those things that you have to, like, you have to be able to have a lot of empathy and be able to put yourself in that person's perspective, right? And so, like, so we have this, I mean, we have some of these challenges at Colossal, right? Like, some of the people that, are not our biggest fans, um, sometimes are very smart people. Sometimes, they aren't, they mean, they may, I truly believe they mean well, but in some cases, if you look at their journeys, sometimes you have these human emotions that will affect people, right? And so, like, we have one researcher that's very vocal against us, which is fine. But if you go back and you look deep into their career, they've had a lot of issues with getting their projects supported and project funding. And so then you get these crazy moonshotty guys out there trying to bring back extinct species and save critically endangered species, and they see the amount of capital we run and they raise and stuff like that. And I think that their perspective is, oh, it's just easy for this. And my research, though, is equally as valuable. Why are we not focusing on this? And I think that I try to put myself in those shoes and say, I try to empathize with this person and say, yeah, but you've had these challenges, and part of it is, maybe market conditions. But what people don't necessarily always realize is that, in this one example that I'm giving you, this individual isn't really taking it from a team perspective, right? It's their specific research. And, like, when you think about what has worked with Colossal, it's
Mm.
that we've had a lot of there's a handful of entrepreneurs that helped me start this business that have sold billions of dollars in companies, right? There's a handful of scientists, a part of the business, that have that are Nobel laureates. We've got a handful of scientists that have, like, literally defined the world of genetics, right? And so sometimes it takes that dream team to come together to go, win. And sometimes when you're in those situations where you have critics, or you have someone that has a different perspective, one of the things that I've always tried to do is try to put myself in that person's shoes, right? And so, if in this one case, if you're a researcher that spent their whole life trying to get grants, hasn't been that successful getting grants, but has also only done it by themselves, they sometimes will look at your situation and think it's better. They don't know about the 90-hour weeks that you work. They don't know about the sleepless nights, because that doesn't always get portrayed in a podcast or a news clipping, right? Or on social media. That it's I heard a great quote once that photographs are great, but they're only capturing the best of times. Like there's very few. I'm talking about our personal photographs. Obviously, war photographs are the difference. But like, most people when they take these are the peaks. There's not as many photos of the valleys, right? And so I think that that's lost on a lot of people, in regardless of what you're working on, is that people don't think about all of that you sacrifice, all those sleepless nights, all the stress and all these things that go with building whatever type of business. And so sometimes it's not easy sometimes for a critic to see that. And so I've always just tried to put myself in their position, assuming that they are not capable always of putting themselves in my position. And so I think that if you extend a higher degree of empathy than you are expecting to receive back, then you will feel more comfortable with both feedback and collaboration from potentially sources that you never thought would be a collaborative source.
Well, yeah, great. Empathy, compassion, these things are so fundamental. It's really relationships, that we're building, isn't it?
Yeah.
Like this comes back to, that fundamental, indigenous way that relationships are everything, and all we're in relation with each other. And the bigger that we focus on the relationships of what one person, to influence another person, we really have to understand what influences them. And then, so this curiosity, I'm hearing is really what has
The
changed
curiosity
the
is
the get.
key. And I think it's
Yeah.
also key, like we have a mentality that it is not our job to persuade anybody, right? It's our job to educate people. And you're going to draw your own conclusions based on all these different life experiences and choices that you've made, right? And so you're going to make your decisions based on kind of that complex matrix of your kind of like own personal neural net, right? But fundamentally, it's my job, or I think anyone's job, especially if you're doing something that's big and bold, to educate people, not try to persuade them, not try to. We never try to convince people that bringing back species is a good idea, or saving species is a good idea. We tell people we think it is, but we always say is like, look, this is what we're doing. If you don't like it, you should do something else. Like, we're not asking you to join us, and we're not asking you to like us and endorse us. But if you should do something different that you feel as compelled to do as compelled to do this. And so, we've just taken this attitude of education and conversation versus persuasion, right? And I think it's really worked for us so far. I mean, who knows? Tomorrow may not work at all, but today it seems like it's working.
And how has this type of education really helped you at the beginning when you were raising capital or
We
starting
were
with
honest. We were
startups?
we were we were we were painfully honest. We were like, we don't have a business plan. Uh, we believe that, if you look at, George Church, and you look at all these top scientists, they believe that have great track records. They believe they can do this. And we are a handful of smart, maybe not even smart, but a handful of business folks that have put good teams together. If we give these people the right funding and focus, and we help support them with the right team, they believe they can achieve this, right? And we believe that that is a paradigm shift for human consciousness, and we think it's a paradigm shift for how humans can relate to both genetic engineering and to nature. And I think that it shows a deeper collaboration between humans, technology, and nature. And so we thought that this was something that was worth pursuing. But we were also like once again, we were very collaborative. We were educating, but we're very transparent. We're like, look, this is like, when we started raising capital, we didn't have a deal with Harvard. We didn't have a deal with George. We didn't have a scientist on the team. We didn't have any of that. And we're like, we got to, like, our job is to go recruit those people. Like, that's our job.
Yeah,
So,
exactly.
and
I like it.
it's
Sorry, go
worked
ahead.
so far.
Why do you think that that's important to say, hey, everything is figure outable instead of having like, I mean, everything can be logical and we can have this plan of action and everything. It can be like this illusion of control and all these like
But you can't
fallacy.
build a
Thank you.
contingency for, everything, right? You just can't,
Right.
right? No matter how smart or thoughtful you are, you just can't. And so you've got to have a core thesis. You've got to have a good team. And then you're really just you're kind of betting on, I always think about it as you're betting on that team. If they do, I believe that that team has the capacity to achieve this and weather the thousand storms that are coming, right? Like, one thing that we didn't, like, and I guarantee you, if you ask much smarter people than me about Colossal, they would have said, because hindsight's 2020, right? And they could easily say, oh, well, I would have thought of that. Let me tell you something we didn't think of. I was on a call, like, in our first year of the business, and I said, yeah, well, of course people in Alaska will like this, and of course, it's good for the environment. And I had someone ask me on a call, they're like, well, have you been to Alaska? And I was like, never been to Alaska. And I was like, that's a really good point. And then they're like, well, if you've never been to Alaska and you've talked to people on the phone and Zoom from Alaska, but you've never been there, how do you really know? And I was like, that's a really good point. So you know what I did after that call? I booked a fucking trip to
Went to
Alaska
Alaska.
because
Yeah.
that was a really good point. And I called some of the folks I'm collaborators with in the Explorers Club, and I said, look, you guys know a lot of people in Alaska. We want to meet people, and we just want to talk to them. We're not selling them anything, but this person said this on a call and they were really right. This woman said this. She's 100% right. And I was like, I need to go to Alaska. And then when we launched the Tasmanian tiger or thylacine, we did it in Australia. We got on a plane and we went to Australia and we met with everyone in Tasmania. We met with everyone in Australia, not everyone, but as many, a lot of people in Tasmania and Australia, because we were like, we need to put boots on the ground and go talk to them, because not just the ecological impact of what we're doing, and the species impact, but in some of the species that we're working on, there's a spiritual impact, right? So, like, we didn't know this before we
100%.
started the project with the thylacine, but the thylacine is critical to the indigenous people groups of Tasmania's creation story. So it's
Mm.
like, so now you're working on something that has a spiritual connection, right? We then started going and meeting with indigenous tribes here in the United States. One of the chairmen, that's why actually why I was late today. One of the chairmen from one of the largest tribes in the US was doing a lab tour today. That's why I was running a few minutes late to our call. And so, we take this attitude of, but we have to get that feedback, right? And so we got this feedback, and this person was 1,000% right. She called us out on it, and I was like, oh, that's a really good thing. And now, hindsight, you could say, of course you should have gone to Alaska. Of course you should have gone to Mauritius. Of course you should have gone to these places. But at the time, you're just working, you just don't think of it, right? And so it's okay to be called out on it, and then look at it, and then run back.
I love that you bring up the spiritual aspect of it because I believe that everything is spiritual. It's all spiritual. Everything is part of creation. And so taking even more of that responsibility or that ability to respond and to choose to manifest with that level of consciousness allows us to recognize that it's all reverent, it's all sacred. Life is sacred, and from that place, we get to actually choose to find more meaning in everything that's happening, and then create more of that empowering meaning if we choose to. And
Yep.
we get to then create from that level. And it's amazing that you're focusing on these levels of integration and that you're completely aware of it. And the fact is like, what do you feel we can do better as organizations or as future business leaders or people that are leading? Because even yesterday I was at UPW and I forget her name, Jamie Kerlima. She says, we're not crazy, we're just first. So you know, like let's I'm curious to like get your perspective on this of because really I know that we're doing this in a bigger way for a meaningful way, and I can see you,
I
brother, and
think
I really
I
appreciate it.
think it's very easy to get into everyday routine. I think it's very easy. It's comfortable. You feel good about it. But, one of my friends and fellow entrepreneurs is a guy named Brian Albee. And I've always thought Brian's one of the smartest guys I've ever met. And I've always asked him, and I asked him once, I was like, man, how are you so smart? And he's like, I'm not smart, I'm just awake. And I was like, what does that mean? And this is before like all the woke movement and and people branding the word woke as something. So this is
Yeah.
before that. But his view was, he's like, there's so many people that are just sleeping as they go through life, and they just get up, rinse and repeat, rinse and repeat, rinse and repeat. And his view was, um, we are true, like, we are awake, and so there's a restlessness that comes with that. And I think it's a healthy restlessness. It can be an unhealthy and sometimes, and it can be painful in terms of like sacrifice that you have to make for business and work and progress. But there is a healthy restlessness from being awake. And so his view, that's always, kind of really stuck with me, because it was one of those things where I'm like, yeah, I don't want to just go through the motions. And so whether you're awake or whether you're first, it's still like, that hunger. I think once you have it, if you can continue to maintain that fire, well, then I think that, all kinds of amazing and sometimes crazy things can come from that. But you've got to give the space for magic to happen. And then you've got to, like, feed that fire as it's going, right? And you can't just get into this comfortability of like routine. So I try to always take that back. Like, am I thinking about things enough? Am I working on things enough? I just don't want to get into the exact same routine every single day, because then I don't think, I'm progressing. But there are downsides to that, right? It's not as comfortable, and you're living a lot of times outside the lines, right, that we've been told to color within. And so sometimes that creates its own set of challenges, but I think the payoffs are significantly better than than just sticking to the same old, same old.
I love it, brother. I know we only have a couple minutes or 5 minutes left here, but I wanted to uh, emphasize a little bit of you're focusing on biodiversity, climate change. How are you seeing the importance of energy infrastructure and the future of energy affecting climate? Do you feel that we can impact that level of
Yeah,
whether it's fossil fuels, renewables, things like this moving
yeah,
forward?
I think it's not realistic to think that over time, or it's not realistic to think that overnight we're going to go off fossil fuels. That's just that is not like our current infrastructure and way of life is built around it, right? So
Right.
we can't just do it overnight. But I think that we can have a responsible path towards it, and then also understand what are regenerative technologies that we can develop, not just to move away from it, but then to regenerate past, right? And so you have to think about both. Like, what is the path off of some of these technologies, right? In innovation, and then what is the path of then fixing that? But this idea that, oh, tomorrow we can just stop using fossil fuels and stuff is just crazy, right? And if you start to
Right.
look at, like, geothermal, solar, and wind and wave and all these things, lots of countries are making meaningful percentages of their energy from these alternative sources, right? And at some point, they will not be the alternative; they'll be the primary sources, right? But it's not realistic to think that we're going to turn that off over time. So we need to be thinking about ways that we can do that over time, as well as we can then build technologies to then fix some of the problems that have been made, that have been created for it. But we as humans didn't know all of these impacts when we started doing all of this. And we have a very comfortable, turn off your AC in Texas in the summer, turn off your heat in Nebraska in the winter, and the ability to go to bring groceries within a mile of your house and see how well 90% of people survive. They just won't. They literally just won't. And so we have to be realistic that we've built an infrastructure in this planet that has a lot of positives, right? We're living longer, we're able to experience new cultures. We're able to invest in things like science and technology and becoming an interplanetary species. But there's cost to it, right? So over time, now that we know that, right, we can start to mitigate against that over time. And I just think that people have to be realistic in that. And this is coming from someone that is, pro, climate change, that's pro saving biodiversity. But I also think that we have to be realistic in that transition curve. And I think that sometimes people get very stuck in these binary perspectives of, we have to move off everything tomorrow, or we can never move off everything. And the reality is it's both, right? It's not an or, it's an and. And I think that a lot of times people aren't really looking and respecting the system that we've made on inferior technologies, being fossil fuels, and that the future will be made on more innovative technologies, but it's going to take a second to get there. And we should just be mindful of that versus like making one or the other. Like, alternative energy sources are not the devil. Fossil fuels are not the devil, right? And so how do we build a transition that sustains humanity, while also then saying, okay, cool, we may make this level of pollution in that transitional time that's going down, but still some pollution is going to exist, like plastics. How do we then build technology saying, okay, we've now moved away from plastics at some point in time, but now we got to go clean up the plastics, right? So I think there'll be lots of opportunities for all kinds of new jobs and innovations, not just in the transition to the new, but in cleaning up the old, right? And so I am an eternal optimist, and I kind of believe in human ingenuity and how we will come to tackle these problems. And yeah, that's just how I try to look at the world, kind of glass is half full.
Beautiful, brother. It's encouraging to hear that perspective, and I love that you're recognizing also so much, because I mean you're involved in it, but the energy transition and the importance of maybe even using some of these distressed assets as a way to increase efficiencies that can then alternatively power, a decentralized economic ecosystem.
Yeah, and I mean, like we have to figure out, like up until a few years ago, we like these are like we're humanity's gonna face new problems, right? And
Mhm.
energy consumption around large language models is a new problem. It was not a problem 10 years ago. It was not a problem 50 years ago. It's a new problem. So how do we transition, how do we transition to new means of energy technologies, while also we have new systems, right? We don't just have planes and cars and houses. We now have things like, big data storage, and we've got satellite communications, and we've got large language models that we have to train, right? And the benefit to all of those is, seemingly pretty massive, but at the same time, it's also a new challenge for power. So we have to think about this, and we're always going to have new challenges as species that we just have to overcome, right? Nobody wants to take their ball and go home and just stop living, right? So we have to just keep innovating through these challenges.
Do you mind if I ask your thoughts on Bitcoin?
Yeah, look, yeah, for sure. I think anytime you have a new technology, especially one that's decentralized, I think in the early days, Bitcoin was a science experiment. I think then it was kind of used for nefarious purposes, as a lot of technologies are, right? But that doesn't mean the technology is evil, right? Like that means that the application of the technologies and people using it for, drug and other applications, because it wasn't traceable, was he got a kind of a bad rap for a season, right? But if you just look at the sheer number of people globally, and institutions that hold Bitcoin, that hold decentralized currency as another asset class, I think that's smart, right? Like, I don't think tomorrow, once again, kind of going back to the same energy conversation, I don't think tomorrow
Transition.
it's not going to tomorrow replace the fiat system. That's that like, and there's
Yeah.
people in Bitcoin that will tell you that, and they're wrong. There's also people in fiat that are like, we'll never have any type of digital currency. And I'm like, I don't think that's true either. Right. And so, I think that it's a new, it is a people first uh, uh, technology. And there's enough people that have spoken it into existence where I think Bitcoin's in an interesting point, right? Where Bitcoin's moving from a religion to an actual currency. Because for a long
Yeah.
time, I think that's where it sat, right? And
Me
it
too.
was in kind of like, well, this is a religion. And, but I do think over time it will be it will be equally. I don't see it replacing the fiat system. I don't, but I think it works hand in hand with the fiat system as an alternative.
I love it. I think too, there's a massive way to really integrate the energy of our planet into the economic ecosystem like Bitcoin, to really bring
And
the
I
power and the
actually think that's one of the best
electricity.
things. I think that's actually one of the best things about Bitcoin. I think
Yeah.
Bitcoin and tying things to these different kind of like layer twos also, like I think it's really interesting to come up. There's new economic, it affords you the opportunity for innovation and economic incentives that a traditional currency doesn't. And so I do think that there's some pretty interesting ideas around it.
I love it, man. I love that you're open to it. I have a few last question actually before we go. Um,
And I
if
do
you
have
have
to
three
bail
days
after
left,
this one, unfortunately.
yeah, if you have 3 days left to live, what would you do?
You know, I feel so convicted about Colossal. I'd probably spend one day making sure that there was the right transition plan here and that we had the right people here, number one. And then I'd spend the next 2 days with friends and family, but I'd want to do it in a pristine, I wouldn't want to do it in a synthetic way. I would not do it in my house. I would probably do it in the mountains or at the beach, enjoying nature in that last sunset and that last sunrise with my family and friends, there. But I would do that on day 2 and day 3 because I feel like what we're doing at Colossal is so important. On day 1, I would ensure that we have the right, I would spend every second of the day ensuring that the incredible women and men here are set up for success without me. And then the next 2 days, I would, that I'd spend it in nature with family.
You're a good man, brother. I'm very grateful for your time. Is there anything else that you want to just add before
No,
we
no,
go?
these were really thoughtful questions. I appreciate, always happy to chat and appreciate you having me.
Hey everyone, and thank you so much for listening to the Resilient Minds. I hope you enjoyed the show. Please make sure to go comment and like and follow us on iTunes or Spotify, and please make sure that if you really love this, to share this episode and make sure that you're inviting all your friends to like it as we continue to unfold what the beauty of our minds does. More importantly, how powerful our heart level of intelligence can be when we combine our heart and our brain together. And more importantly, make sure you take the time to take a look at what we're doing at Balanced Media Ventures and how we can actually really support you in doubling your impact, your income, and your influence, and how you can bring your life's greatest vision into your purpose and create it from that level of reality. Talk to you soon.